Good afternoon, and welcome to Live in a Greenhouse on YouTube. If you're new here, this channel is about my journey to design, build, and then live in the first greenhouse-enclosed tiny home in the United States. My journey started about 7 years ago when I saw a video by Kirsten Dirksen about a greenhouse-enclosed home in Sweden, and I was hooked. I immediately scoured the internet for every one of these I could find, and they were all in Europe. I'd previously built or substantially remodeled a few homes, so I wrote up a brief of my requirements for what will probably be my last home, and then researched how all the other greenhouse-enclosed homes dealt with some of these issues. It took about 2 years of planning and to draw up the designs, about a year for permitting, and then about a year to build. There's also a Live in the Greenhouse website where I write longer articles about details I don't cover in the videos. Link is in the description down below. And today I will highlight some of the highs, some of the lows, and some of my plans for the coming year. So if you enjoy this content, please like and subscribe so YouTube will show it to more viewers, and come along today as I discuss the evolution of 2 years living in a greenhouse. My brief included requirements to be able to age in place, to have space outside the house for relaxing and entertainment that's protected from the elements, and pleasant views in all directions. During the time I was designing my project, my parents were near end of life, and other family members had mobility and aging-related issues from which I gleaned requirements to age in place related to accessibility design, such as no thresholds at doors and at the shower, and materials for durability and ease of maintenance, such as tile, marmoleum, and steel. Here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, I wanted to have outdoor space protected from the rain for relaxing and entertainment, for exercise, and for hobbies for now and long into the future. Having lived in places with no windows, I required natural light in every room, to not require electric lights even on gloomy winter days, and also to have pleasant views from everywhere inside the house that I would tend to sit, lay, or stand. The first year living inside the greenhouse was a building and learning year, mostly preparing the inside of the greenhouse and figuring out the environmentals like light, heat, and humidity control. When I moved in September 2022, except for some final punch list items, the house was done inside and out. The greenhouse structure was complete, but there was still a lot of work to repair the landscaping, create the gardens inside the greenhouse, and finish the pool circulation and filter system. There are also pre-existing structures on my property that need repair and maintenance. I work from home full-time, so inside the house was a lot of moving around my old furniture, trying to find a comfortable arrangement while figuring out the right furniture to fit the space. By the start of year 2, the furniture arrangement was set and didn't change throughout the rest of the year. During the good weather of year 2, I picked away at landscape repair, including moving a lot of rocks to level an edge around the ramp, to terrace the slope on the ramp garden side, and stairs up this bank to the greenhouse west end. Year 3 will finish moving the large rock piles to finish the jobs that are too big for me. Last year also put up the temporary car shelter. Here the main annoyances are rain and tree sap. I just tossed wildflower seeds in this area the last 2 years, and then I brought in 3 yards of dirt last year to raise the ramp garden to its finish grade while deciding what to plant here in year 3, and prepared this area for fall bulb planting. Year 2 was a big year inside the greenhouse. This area for the greenhouse was leveled using a cut and fill technique, which means there's no native soil inside the greenhouse, and the ground is so hard it needs a jackhammer-like machine to dig in it. So all planting, except the trees, are in raised beds, and the entire greenhouse floor was covered in wood chips because they were free. But the chips are too sharp to walk on barefoot. They shift underfoot, and they track inside the house, making a mess. Plus, I need a lot more chips on the paths between the raised beds. The little Sunjo chipper I use to clean up yard debris makes much finer and not so sharp chips. The stonemason will start in January to lay paving stones along the south path, around the potting bench, around the bedroom door, and then to the west end doors. Then all of these chips can move to raise the path throughout the food garden. At the end of the first year, the raised beds were in place in the food garden, but not complete along the south wall. Drip irrigation was in place, but really poor soil and rampant powdery mildew made for a disappointing year. Over the winter, I brought in yards of better soil and planted a mixed seed cover crop as a spring green manure. The peach tree grew much faster than I expected, which meant the olive tree, which had been placed next to the peach tree, needed to move a year earlier than I expected. Needing to find a place with the most sun and also have deeper raised beds. Over the winter, I reconfigured the raised beds into an L shape to add the olive tree, turning this area into a U shape. The olive transplanted well and has grown several inches this year. Reconfiguring the beds meant a slight adjustment to the irrigation supply line and also switched from drip emitters to soaker hoses. I hope to get the irrigation onto a timer system before next spring. The Colomondan has been a trooper. It got broken during the construction and froze the first winter, but has recovered nicely. After moving locations several times, it ended up here as a hose guide around this bed. The sunflowers didn't get very big the first year, so I was not prepared for this in year 2. And then this, and then this. They snapped the 1x2 support. I'll definitely plant them again next year, but with better support. The potting bench was cobbled together with leftover materials and free stuff. This year in March, I started about 200 flowers, vegetable, and herb seed plugs on heating mats that worked really well. But most of the year it's been a mess, and I like my spaces neat and organized. I'll need to move everything around the bench for the pavers to go down. It'll be much more organized when I move it back. The food garden is planned as a food forest, where everything is edible, including flowers. Last winter, I spent a lot of time planning the food garden with many companion combinations and trying to avoid foes too close to each other. Starting so many plants from seed, I could inexpensively experiment with trying the same plant in multiple areas to see where it was best for light and water, and followed the square foot garden spacing for density. I started direct sowing seeds and seedling transplant in mid-May. With few exceptions, everything grew well where it was placed. Especially the leaf lettuce lasted much longer into the summer than expected, and I ended up pulling it so the beets it was planted with could come on better. Because I had these wire squares for free, I zip-tied them to the purlin as trellis for the cucumbers, peas, and watermelon. Don't think I'll do this again, as I think it didn't allow enough airflow and it was difficult to pick the food between the trellis and the greenhouse walls. The winners this year were leaf lettuce, beets, cherry and plum tomatoes, purple and green beans, sugar snap peas, lavage, basil, leeks, bunching onions, sunflowers, and carrots. What didn't do well this year were fennel, cucumber, potatoes, radish, and watermelon. Over the winter, I'll bring in compost to top up the beds, and next year we'll grow pretty much all of the same things again, except the watermelon. The peach tree is my pride and joy, although I do want fruit. The tree's purpose for being here is to provide shade on the pool and house from the afternoon sun, so I've been letting it grow tall. It started as a 4-foot twig in October 2022, bore 3 peaches, and was 7 feet in September of 2023. It bore about 12 peaches this year and is now about 14 feet tall. In the spring, I'll prune it for shape and height. The goal with the sitting area is to have a comfortable place to entertain or relax surrounded by plants that look and smell good. First year, I only had time to fill the beds with dirt and get some plants in place. Over the winter, I found inexpensive metal rings that fit perfectly between the purlin and concrete, filled them and topped the rest of the beds with compost and better soil. This also required adjusting the irrigation, but I had spare tube and fittings, so that went quickly. This year included nasturtiums, mint, sage, parsley, 2 kinds of oregano, rosemary, bee balm, bay laurel, borage, lavender, and catnip, which I had to pull because Kitty was imbibing a bit too much. Starting herbs and flowers from seed and augmenting with some economical nursery plants, by midsummer this area smelled really good and was nice to look at throughout the day. The ornamental garden starts along the south wall where I can see it from the living room where I sit while working at my day job. This side garden was very haphazard as it was filled with mostly herbs and flowers started from seed or sale table finds or neighbors' yards. There are now enough perennials for structure that I'll fill in with annuals from seed next year. This year included primrose, violet, pansies, lavender, columbine, portulaca, godicia, sage, Raleigh's favorite, dianthus, calendula, nasturtium, and coneflowers. In terms of pests, last year to keep deer out, I put up this cargo net while the doors are open. This summer, I think the lure was too great and a deer came in that I didn't actually see, although I saw the evidence. Then a second time, I scared the deer in mid-munch and saw it squeeze under the flexible net. So now I leave the doors open only a few inches for airflow. This year there were way less frogs inside the greenhouse than last year. I've seen chipmunks inside the greenhouse and have caught a couple mice in traps. Now the cat takes care of these particular pests, and she enjoys catching grasshoppers. It was another peak year for tent caterpillars, and there were plenty outside the greenhouse, but few inside, and here's part of the reason why. Aphids were pretty much limited to the calendula, but really covered them. An order of ladybugs took care of those. Pill bugs hit the potatoes hard. Let me know in the comments if there's an organic way to control them for next year. I get a lot of questions about pollinators. First, I try to select varieties that are self-pollinating, but cross-pollination is happening by wind from the fans and or convection from the doors and windows up and out the ridge vents. I also see bees, butterflies, moths, and other flying insects. I assume they've been coming in through the west end door, so I'm not sure if keeping the doors closed more next year will inhibit that access. The second year also focused on improving comfort inside the greenhouse. I did not buy the automated shade curtains for the greenhouse. They were too expensive and just another thing to maintain. For light control, last year I put up strategically placed inexpensive sunshades. They've held up really well, and work well enough that I didn't feel the need for more this year, although I may put up one or two more for shade over the potting bench. My reason for the greenhouse was shelter from rain, not to have a Mediterranean climate year-round. There's no auxiliary heat in the greenhouse other than the air-to-ground tubes that exhaust earth temperature air. On cloudy days, the greenhouse may be only 5 to 10 degrees above the outside temperature, which means when it's below freezing outside, it can be below freezing inside, including frost and icicles, like it did a week in January when the outside temperature was 10 degrees and inside was 21. On sunny days, as early as March, it can get to the upper 60s, low 70s, and I can open all the doors and windows until sunset. This summer, the Pacific Northwest had lower temperatures than most of the United States, and heat has not been too much of an issue inside the greenhouse. Like July, the maximum in the greenhouse was 97 degrees. By comparison, where my brother lives in Arizona, it was over 100 degrees for most of the summer. There were plans to run several tubes during the construction underground through the yard into the greenhouse, but that didn't happen. For both heat and humidity control, I've had to leave the greenhouse doors open to get the makeup air needed to feed the convection that moves the hot and humid air out the ridge vents. As an experiment, this year we installed two 2x6 awning windows on temperature-controlled hinges to see if that was sufficient ventilation or even a good value option for adding more intake. The jury's still out, but so far I think they help, but not enough. Humidity inside the house has not been an issue. There are 3 extraction fans that quickly turn over the inside air. There has been no sign of mold on the walls, floor, behind the toilet, around the laundry, in the shower, or under the sinks. This reading was just after washing the dishes without the fan running. This is an hour later. Managing the relative humidity in the greenhouse is more of a challenge between ideal levels for plants versus what I find comfortable. During the summer, air is cooled and dehumidified by the air-to-ground tubes. Winter is cold enough that I don't worry about mold, but the first winter, the relative humidity was uncomfortable and the air felt heavy and damp. Last winter, however, I learned more about when to open and close the ridge vents and using the fans that conditions were much better, staying in acceptable range during daytime when I might be in the greenhouse. I found that greenhouse, house, and garden maintenance isn't too overwhelming, but that's because my expectations were that, as a working greenhouse, it will not be pristine. For example, cobwebs. Spiders are beneficial, so I let them be, except I keep a couple brushes strategically placed near the doors and sitting area to brush away cobwebs or debris that blows in through the ridge vents. Once a year, I wipe the blades on each fan, vacuum debris from the shades, sweep the roof, and clean the skylights. Since the polycarbonate panels are not clear like glass, they don't show every fingerprint or streak like glass. I washed all 4 sidewalls the first year to wash off the construction dust and marks. February was a good time to wash the walls with potassium bicarbonate to kill the powdery mildew and not worry about stepping on too many plants. I can reach the entire sidewalls from the ground with the extension pole, but can't reach the 24-foot peak on the gable ends. Of course, I expected to have to clean the roof, but it didn't actually need to the first year. Unfortunately, this year was the worst for tree pollen that anyone remembers, and with the lack of rain to fill the rainwater tanks, I was not able to pressure wash the roof. Given the size of the gutters on this thing and the tall trees on my property, gutter maintenance is a must. This spring, I waited a little too long that the debris started to rot. Couldn't smell it from the ground, but up close the smell was horrendous. Fortunately, cleaning the gutters isn't too bad. It's time-consuming, but not too scary. There was about triple the amount of garden to maintain this year compared to last year. Maintenance work started earlier in the spring and has lasted longer into the fall than last year. This year, I was able to get a bale of straw to mulch the entire food and ornamental gardens, with all the maintenance benefits of less weeding and less watering. Although the irrigation system covers most of the garden, it requires the pressure produced by the pump in the rainwater tanks. Once the rain tanks went dry, I had to pump water out of the pool, and that pump is not strong enough to pressurize the soaker hoses. For those weeks, I would start at one end of the garden, set the hose in a timer, and then go back, move the hose, and continue like that throughout the day. Otherwise, it wasn't much work to maintain the garden. I'd walk around throughout the week to deadhead flowers, pull weeds, or try to diagnose problems. Pretty standard gardener stuff. The main difference for me is that because of the lights on the purlins, roof, and sitting area chandelier, I'm able to be in the garden before or after work when it's still dark. Or just laying on the sofa listening to the first rain in weeks. And there you have it. A lot of slow but steady progress in comfort and livability.